Okay, Paul, are we ready?
We are live. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So welcome. I'm Shalane DiBernardi, an assistant director with the Division of Water Resources. And we are here representing the Water Development Coordinating Council to discuss the Unified Water Infrastructure Plan, or as we call it, the UWIP for short, and discuss the whole prioritization process, what's happening, what's been happening. As you can see, the website is listed at the bottom of the page where you can gather information. The QR code takes you directly to the comment form. So if you go to the website, this is what you'll see. This is what the website looks like, has the meeting schedule, the button to submit a comment, take you to the comment form, and also the prioritization process draft report. So those are all easily found from here. Here is what the form looks like. If you have a question or comment you'd like to submit while you're here or later, you can use this form whenever you want. That button that takes you to the review process draft, that'll bring you to this 14-page document that lays out in detail what we're going to cover here tonight. So if you have more in-depth questions, we encourage you to go look this over. It's long, it's got a lot of information, but I think it's useful. So these public meetings are being held to present our information and gather public comment so that we can make this really what the public wants, and come up with a prioritization process that is equitable for everyone statewide, not give priority to one type of entity or one type of provider, one area over another. We want to consider all areas of the state and the needs that are there. Today we'll cover who the WDCC, the Water Development Coordinating Council, who they are, what they do, and how this whole process came about. So the Water Development Coordinating Council is made up of all of these state agencies that can provide funds for water projects. The Division of Water Resources, the Divisions of Water Quality and Drinking Water are primary funders of water infrastructure in the state. The others, UDAF, of course, funds some agriculture projects, and Housing and Community Development is actually the home of the Permanent Community Impact Fund Board. So they also can fund some water projects. And then the Water Conservancy District was a recent addition to represent large water conservancy districts like Central, who might need funding for water. That was an addition in House Bill 280 last year, which also made some of the changes of why we're here tonight. Water resources, water quality, and drinking water have been designated the relevant agencies that some of the processes that will be laid out tonight apply to. It doesn't apply to all of these entities, but specifically to those three divisions of water resources, water quality, and drinking water. The goals of the WDCC has been around since the 80s. A lot of people don't realize that. The intention of its creation was to coordinate funds between the various funding agencies. But historically, it's been a little more casual. Now, with the changes made in House Bill 280, we have been directed to engage in the planning and prioritization for this UWIP and distribute any funds in the Water Infrastructure Fund or the WIF, which doesn't exist much yet, but we're working on it. So House Bill 280 laid out this timeline, set some requirements. Those relevant agencies had to come up with their status of funds, prepare an integration of existing funds study, what funds that existed in those boards could be integrated into the WIF. Board of Water Resources offered up our city's water loan fund, which became a part of that. So that one board fund doesn't exist anymore. The relevant agencies had to create individual plans. Those were due June 30th and will be due annually. And coming up the end of this month, there is a fee study that has to be completed that we'll recommend if there should be a user fee and or tax, new statewide fee or tax on water to fund these projects that are going to be identified through this process. And then the UWIP has to be completed by March 1st of next year. Going through the ranking and prioritization again, and the state water plan has to be completed by the Division of Water Resources the end of next year. So, as I mentioned, historically, the WDCC they were more casual meetings where they would talk about what the status of their funds were. There were occasional questions of, hey, we've got this project that's come to us. Could you provide funding? We're out. And there would be those discussions, but there wasn't intentional planning. There was no gathering of all the project data and trying to rank and prioritize. That's what we're trying to do now. We have gone through quite a process and hope we have a pretty good understanding of what the statewide water infrastructure needs are and how we can prioritize those projects and rank them to hopefully get funding for some of them. So that is where I will turn the time over to Eric Dixon. He's going to go through what we've been doing and what our process is now. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Eric Dixon. I'm also with the Division of Water Resources. So Shalene talked about the UWIP, which was put into place with that House Bill 280 last year. And this UWIP is one of the major components of it. And the intent is to gather a list of all potential water infrastructure projects for the state for the next 20 plus years. And then kind of prioritize and lay them out and kind of get a feel for what funds will be needed over time. So February and March of this year, we kind of had some outreach and let companies and governments and municipalities and just all the different groups know that we're going to be doing this collection. And that happened April 7th through May 9th. And this one was done with the time frame. We kind of had to do what we could, and it was submitted through spreadsheets. So it was a little compiling that. We had some consultants on the team that helped do that, and so we've got that initial collection of data. And we'll talk a little bit later about a different process we're looking at going forward, moving forward. And then in June 30th, there was a technical memorandum that kind of was prepared along with those agency plans for how the scoring for those was that went into the agency plans. And those relevant agency plans were submitted to the WDCC, and the WDCC will kind of use those as the basis for their plan, which is due March 1st of next year. October 8th, it was published, and it was that 14-page PDF that Shalene mentioned. That was put on the website back on October 8th, and that outlines the proposed prioritization process. And now we're doing these public meetings to get input from public. If there's things that might improve it or questions, make sure that it's clear in what's happening. We did that initial project collection, and this is just kind of a summary of what we got from it. Almost 3,700 projects, 255 entities, almost $18 billion in total project costs. And from what they submitted, it was just under $8 billion anticipated what they would request for state funding. And that's just in what they were anticipating requesting. We took that information, and the map over there on the left, that kind of shows the layout of where these projects were, which when we got done, we were really glad to kind of see it was statewide. It wasn't just in the Wasatch Front or just in the big, we got projects that are submitted from throughout the state. So felt really good about that. And we know it's not everything. We know it was only open for a month. And so there's stuff that's not in there that will need to be added. And this will be, I'll just say it when I talk about something a little bit later. It'll be an ongoing process. But we took this initial information, and we had one of the categories that we had when they input the information was projects needed within the next 1 to 2 years. Then we had a group for 3 to 5, 6 to 10, 10 to 20, and then 20 plus. So we looked at those first 2 years, and and then divided it between the two years, it was showing it roughly $420 million would be needed each of those first 2 years. And this kind of shows a breakdown of that. The submitted projects was what was actually submitted from everybody and added up and totaled and broken out into the different relevant agencies of who those projects would apply to. And that was 375 million. And we also did what we've called the small community allowance. And that was a process that we got from either drinking water or water quality. One of them had a process to help, we know some of these smaller communities might not have looked that far into the future and laid it out detailed. So we have a formula and a process that came up with how much we need for these smaller communities. Then we also took that and looked at everybody that had submitted. And if it looked like some of those smaller communities had submitted stuff, we took it out so that we weren't duplicating amounts and things. So then it gets to that total request, and there in the bottom right-hand corner is the $420-ish million what we're saying is for the fiscal year 2027. And the state's fiscal year starts on July 1st. This breaks it out into just kind of a visual of all that information. You can see the bumps in the graph as it goes years 1 to 2, and then it bumps up for years 3 to 5, drops down for years 6 to 10, and then the big drop for 10 on. And looking at those first 10 years where we feel there's probably a better feel for what's needed in those next 10 years. Some entities had looked out 20 years and had some information, but we fully anticipate as that gets closer, those will come up. This will be a moving, a living line that adjusts each year, and as projects get entered. So now we're kind of getting into the meat of what this meeting is about, getting input on this prioritization process. And this is we've got, like I said, we've got a team of consultants that have and helped us come up with this process, and we've broken it into these 3 phases. We'll just go through each of these phases in a little more detail. The first one is the provisional scoring. So basically the first part of that is getting the information in. And I mentioned how originally we'd done it just through some Google Docs and Excel spreadsheets. We're in the process right now of setting up something in the Utah project portal. Now this is a process that's in place for some other things already that the state uses. And we're adding the UWIP into this Utah project portal. And the plan is that once it's up and live, everything that's already been submitted will get taken and put into that. So information that's been entered won't have to be re-entered by all the entities that have already submitted that information. We will, when we get it all live and out to the public, we'll want them to go in and confirm things and make sure that everything looks right. And then new entities can get in, and every entity will have a login so they can get in and look at their projects, update the information, because we don't want to have a resubmittal every time. Now, this will be something where, and we'll have every year, once a year, we'll say, okay, this is the deadline for when updates need to be done. And we're going to use the information at that date. So the relevant agencies can then do their process to update the projects for the each year. So again, that's in process. Our goal is to have that out maybe in early November. I mean, that's what we're gunning for and aiming for. So everyone will be informed. Those that have information already submitted, we'll send the email to everybody that's in that list to let them know that it's live, and then we'll be sending stuff out to the public when it is live so the entities that didn't get in that first round can get in. And then that'll be basically open all the time to get in and do edits and updates whenever you need. So the provisional scoring, we came up with 6 categories, and these are basically dictated and tied into requirements that were in the HB 280 and also HB 285 of this year, and it has some cleanup items and clarification items. And we gave each of these criteria a weight. This is as we got together as the UWIP team and looked at the different categories we came up with and came up with these weights. And these are we kind of understand that these might change over time. This is the first time this UWIP's getting in place, so we're learning as we go, and we want to fine tune it and tweak things as we go. If there are things that we can do to make it better and improve it to get it working how it's expected to work. So we're gonna. I won't go into a lot of detail on each of these different criterion. They're in that 14-page PDF that outlines all these different scores. But basically, for example, this one, the MAGI, which down at the bottom you see that stands for the median adjusted gross income. Each area has this based on the community and where they live in, and that's one of the criteria, because the goal is that we want to make sure that the local entities or the municipalities that are already collecting what is kind of fair statewide, collecting what they should be or could be before they are receiving grant funds or other funds from the UWIP. So that just kind of gives a breakdown of what those categories would be for that criterion. That's a critical issue. Is it a public health issue, safety, or regulatory requirement? Different scores for different levels of that. Water efficiency. Are there efficiency benefits? We know the critical need to be more efficient with water and use our water as well as we can to get it to go as far as we can. Design. Is it just kind of a concept right now, even though they might say it's needed in 3 years? Has design actually been started on it? Are there, is it in a report or in a study where they've got it kind of more than just conceptual, and or have more accurate cost estimates been prepared? And this is all based on information that's provided when they submit the project information. And an applicant priority. We don't want to try to tell the different applicants, this project should be a higher priority for you. That's has a big role of what they say is the most important for them and how it ranks in our priority list. And then population. There's always been concern of, well, we don't want to just have things in the big cities get all the money. You don't want everything to just go to the rural communities where they might have a more financial need. So this kind of takes those both of those impacts into consideration, looks at the population and the funding needs and kind of ties those together so that we feel it. And as we've looked at the information that's been submitted and the score, we feel it did a good job of kind of balancing things out so that it wasn't all one way or the other. So all those projects were collected, and this shows a breakdown between the 3 relevant agencies of water resources, drinking water, and water quality, which agency got which type of infrastructure project type. And that's just kind of ties into how the projects they've typically funded historically. So anything that comes through the UWIP will be divided in that process into this breakdown. So after the data is collected and assigned to their relevant agencies, then the agencies do the next couple steps where they take the information that was gathered, the scores that were calculated in the provisional scoring, and they look at it and say, is there any information missing that we need to get back with the applicant and say we need some more information here, and see if there's any adjustments or anything that are needed. So that's the main purpose of that agency ranking and reviewing of the information that's submitted initially. And then they take all those projects and put them into the relevant agency plan, which I mentioned. That plan is updated annually. The UWIP is required to be updated at least every 4 years. As we get through this and get going, we'll see if it makes more sense to do it more often or based on how things move forward. So then the funding prioritization, and this is, like I said, the prioritization process is important, but this funding prioritization is the meat of what we're looking for an input for. So that's where we're at right now. And this is the first time with this process for getting this prioritization. So this talks about the different things that the prioritization will be based on. So we've got the scores, those provisional scores, those kind of just rank them numerically, but then where do we have a break, or The whole goal of this is how much money is needed and what projects need it the most. And so that's what the prioritization will kind of identify those things. So we'll go through the different steps for that. And then when it's back on the bottom there, we'll get into it. When it's all said and done, then the WDCC goes to Utah legislature and kind of says, here's some recommendations or requests that we have for providing funds for all these projects that are needed. So the different criteria, these are the four key ones that we've identified. The one is tied into that MAGI, just making sure that the entities are already charging adequate amounts. If they're just charging hardly anything and then they're coming for money, it's like, well, we know that there's other processes that, that you should be getting some more money before coming to the state for the grants and things. And then we've also got a provisional score threshold. As we look at all those scores, is there kind of a break where, and this will be what the WDCC kind of looks at and decides, here's a good, we feel like projects at this score, more or less, anything above here is probably well enough along and prepared that they're ready to start the more formal funding application process, and they're developed enough to be ready for that. Then we've also got this, what we're calling the maximum funding limitations, and we'll show a little bit more of that. But that's basically just so that these giant projects, high cost projects, don't just suck up all the money in one project for the whole year for everybody else. And we'll kind of show you how that breakdown goes. And then the last one is a requirement from HB 285 from this year is that a capital asset management plan has to be in place in order to receive any funds for projects that are on a UWIP list. This is the one that shows the basically the maximum grant percent that a project can get based on the total project cost. So starting out with $0, the maximum a project can get was 75%. Then it has a linear drop over to once a project's up to $10 million, it can only receive a maximum amount of 20%. And we know, everybody's not going to need to get these are the maximum amounts that are allowed. With funding and what's available and things, adjustments could be made. We know there are some entities that aren't requesting the full amount that they could because they have other sources, grants, or the money that they have. So these are just the maximum amounts that would be allowed to be given to those different applicants. So just kind of for example, let's look at this year, and let's say the second $100 million down there is roughly about what, as we've looked at historically between the three relevant agencies with the loans that are out and the revolving funds that are coming back from those loans, it's roughly about $100 million coming in each year. And then the thought is, well, let's say we request another $100 million to go into the WIF for this year. That would be a total funding amount of $200 million for this year. And then as you look back at the projects, that would basically provide enough funds and these are between 150 to 200 based on those funding limitations that are selected. The MAGI and the maximum allowable amount. There's some adjustment in there that the WDCC, and based on the input we received from these public meetings, 150 to 200 projects would be able to receive funds from the WIF and the funds already in place. And taking it further into this year, another one of the requirements for this process is we need to set up rules for how this funding will be broken out, how the funding will be broken out between the relevant agencies. This kind of a concept that's in the draft right now is the first 50% of the WIF funds would be taken and divided, shown here in this column, this 40, 30, 30. Drinking water would get 40%, water quality would get 30%, and water resources would get 30%. And then the second 50%, the WDCC would kind of look at it and look at the needs, look at all the projects, and kind of be able to say, dictate how those are broken out. So for example, let's say this year you're looking at the projects of that other 50%, the 47, 37, 16 breakdown. that would give a total funding breakdown over here on the far right for that $100 million. So this is just kind of a sample of, you know, some nice even round numbers, $100 million each. So just kind of give an idea of what's being proposed in those rules and things. So a little bit more on the rules. That's currently in process also, because the requirements, and that'll receive input from these public meetings, what goes into those final rules. It talks about here what will be included in those rules. A definition of an emergency project and small project. As the HB 280 says, emergency projects and small projects don't need to go through this process. But what is an emergency project and what is a small project? So we're in the process of coming up with exactly what does that mean? You know, what's a real emergency, and how, you know, projects just costs just keep increasing. So those will probably, the small projects might adjust over time and things. So we're in the process of figuring out those. And then it needs to include the prioritization process with the funding levels that we talked about. And it will also have a rule for how the different agencies, or the WDCC transfers money out of the WIP into those different agencies. And the UWIP will be officially adopted, and it will kind of better define what is required in the asset management plans related to the UWIP. That'll be coming out later this year. It's kind of tied in with this because we want the feedback from this to kind of see if there's any influence. You know, we'll take what we can and the best we can and adjust those rules to try and address the questions that came out from this public meeting process. But there will also be public comments available once the rules are out, drafted and submitted through the Office of Administrative Rules. So what's next? We've got this process going on right now. We've got a meeting next week in Brigham City, and then the week after that down in Cedar City. And then the thought is to kind of leave this comment period open on the website through November 14th. As comments come in, we'll look at addressing those and getting those published as required, and so that people can see how we're addressing the comments. And then the incorporation of those comments will be November 14th through January 15th of next year. I mentioned that Utah project portal being open, hopefully early November, so that we can get, and the plan and thought is to get that open so that we can get more projects in. And then we'll do a quick turnaround of getting those incorporated and into the first round, the first official UWIP, which would need to go to the Utah Watersheds Council. One of the requirements in the HB 280 is that needs to be sent to that council for review and comments before it can then be finalized and adopted by March 1st. And then information from it will be used to request, presented to the legislature and request funding or make recommendations of what some options are. And they can take that and they'll have to decide what they want to move forward with that. So again, this is the link on the bottom right-hand corner. If you type that in, it'll take you here and you can submit a comment on that middle button or pull up that PDF on the button on the right. Okay, what we're going to be doing now is Shalane's going to come up and questions that have been submitted. She'll explain what she's doing now.
And I was just informed we apparently lost the live stream for a minute. So to anyone who might be watching online, it will be available later if you need to go back and rewatch. Before I go to questions or comments we've had before the meeting, is there anything you'd like me to address, those that are actually here? Not off the top of your head?
As you were talking, I was just trying to connect the dots in my brain. This with, I can't remember what it is.
So there's the UWIP.
Yeah.
That's the plan. And then WIF is the funding.
So the WIP funding, I was thinking, I have this acronym CIP, in my brain that I think that's drinking water has a funding mechanism that you can go and apply for
Where did I go?
through CIP. CIP? B, is it B? B.
CIB, the Community Impact
Yeah.
Board.
Are these similar? Are they help? Are they similar things? Is it replacing one?
Okay, so,
What's the relationship?
okay, so the CIB does use the project portal currently. That's who it was created for primarily. We are now working with the creators of the portal to expand, to include the UWIP, not replace the CIB's portal. Because that's one thing, the Community Impact Board funds more than just water projects, right? And they use their mineral leasing funds to build a community swimming pool, or you buy a new fire truck, something like that if it's necessary. But they can also do water projects with their funds. This is now just expanding it to the entire state to cover all water projects through this water infrastructure plan and the water infrastructure fund.
Yeah, perfect.
So yes, the project portal will not be, the UWIP will not completely replace the CIB use of the portal. The portal will just be expanded. There are a couple of questions I've received. You don't have to do that. I got it. Thanks, Michael. So there was one I received, I'm guessing this might have been from a meeting I presented at yesterday because it's similar to something I heard there. It asks, is there information regarding how the application process for funding would work once funding is granted by the legislature? For example, will only projects with a certain ranking, prioritization, designation be able to apply for funds? Will drinking water, water resources, and water quality choose the highest ranked projects, and those are the candidates that may apply? Or would it be an open application process, and the project's ranking will be considered in the evaluation of the project application? Will each of the agencies be keeping their current application process, or will it be revised or added to adjust for with funding? And these are great questions. Sadly, I'm afraid the answer right now is I'm not sure. We believe our application process will have to be adjusted because the intention is, if the legislature makes an appropriation, or if WIF becomes funded by a user fee or a tax, we are hoping that those will be able to be provided as grant funds, not revolving loan funds like much of our current funding is. So the idea is that we might have to adjust our current application process. If you're familiar with water resources, we pretty much accept applications all the time. We just have deadlines for if you want to be considered at a certain meeting. But we realize that everything we do is a loan fund at this point, and people would prefer grants to loans if they're available. So there might need to be an adjustment. As far as only the highest ranked projects being allowed to apply, I don't think that's our intention either. I think the intention is we would create the ranked and prioritized list, but then a lot of it would depend on what projects are actually ready to go and could utilize that funding. So I think you'd have to be on the list, but not necessarily the very top ranked projects to have access to that WIF funding. Which leads me to another question I've been asked multiple times. It was presented at the last meeting, but I'd like to address it here too. If our water system is really good at planning and self-funding, and we don't think we're going to need state funds, should we still submit our projects? My answer would be please. If you're willing to, please submit your projects. Because if the fee study comes out and recommends a fee for all users throughout the state, And I realize if your fees are already high, you're not going to like that very much. But because the intention is that any funds raised by those fees would be provided as grants, you would now have access to free money that you wouldn't have access otherwise. But you have to be on the list to be eligible for those funds. I don't know if there are any you think I should address. I think those are the main ones I wanted to cover. Has this sparked anything else in the room?
So I've got a question. Most of what we operate is federally built, federally funded projects.
Yes.
So do we still qualify being a federal project?
So yes, the question is, if most of your projects are federally funded federal projects, are you still eligible? My answer is, if it's fully federally funded, then you don't need state funds. However, if there is a local match of some sort, you absolutely would be eligible for funding. And that is one of the criteria that we have, is how much outside funding do you have available for your project. We know some of what we found in recent years is some federal projects, the federal feds are backing off in how much they want to provide. And so the state has been stepping up more for some of those projects where the feds are just like, we're not going to keep paying for this. So yeah, I'd say if you've got sufficient federal funds that you don't need state funding, maybe you don't want to submit. But again, if there are going to be new fees or taxes that are available for statewide infrastructure, and there is a local need for some funds, I would encourage you to submit those projects.
Also, does it include rehabilitation and replacement projects, or does it only include new projects?
Construction. Does it only include rehabilitation and replacement, or only new? It includes all. It even includes planning.
Okay.
So yes, there is a list. I think it's included in that document of all eligible types of projects. And yes, rehab and replacement are definitely on that list. Okay. Well, I think we will call it a night then. Back at DNR, we are wrapping up in the room and adjourning the meeting. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.